My name is David Harrison Greis. Welcome to the Greis Report, your unfiltered daily voice for truth. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. On Friday night, I sat down with Mike Colombo. He is a candidate for Staten Island Borough President in the November 2025 race. You know how I've been talking on this show about how important it is to vote in every single election that you possibly can, to overturn every seat from red to blue? Well, that starts at home. That starts with the candidates local to your area. Every single seat that we can flip to blue would be spectacular for 2026 and beyond. So please make sure, despite all this kerfuffle about the voting machines, whatever you need to do, make sure to get out and vote, and make sure that you're voting blue to take our country back. So let's get into that interview right now. Let's listen to it. All right, so my name is David Harrison Greis. This is the Greis Report. Welcome to the show. Tonight I have on Mike Colombo. He is a candidate for borough president here in Staten Island, and I'm very excited that you're actually all going to actually hear about our local politics, because Staten Island is so forgotten, and I think we're going to be changing that with all of this. So would you like to introduce yourself, Mike?
Absolutely. Mike Colombo. I am the Democratic candidate for borough president here on Staten Island, and it's great that you brought up the fact that we are the forgotten borough, because my campaign slogan is we're going to take Staten Island from forgotten to unforgettable.
I love that. That's fantastic. So as far as your platform goes and the things that you want to do as policies, so on your website you list things like advocacy, land use, liaising with the city, and it seems like the main job of a borough president is to kind of like make sure that the Staten Island gets the services that are owed to them by the city, kind of like liaising with the city. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So after the charter revision of 1990, a lot of the powers of the borough president was consolidated in the mayor's office, leaving the borough president responsible for constituting community boards, other advisory boards, and advocacy for their borough. And that's what I feel that Staten Island's been lacking when it comes to our state and local and city partners. Our borough president has chosen a path of non-engagement, because that benefits him to the detriment of the rest of Staten Island. And that's why I decided to run.
Okay. So that was a great response. Thank you. So as far as your the actual platform that you're running on, so things like affordability of housing, transportation, public health, can you pick like one of the most important issues to you and tell us a little bit about what you're planning to do?
I think affordability for everything is on top of everyone's mind, specifically housing. My parents bought their first house on Staten Island in 1996. They bought a middle unit townhome for about $178,000. Right now, that home, I checked Zillow a few months ago, goes for over $600,000. Nothing has changed. It's still a three-bedroom? Yeah, it's still a three-bedroom middle unit townhome with a not very large backyard, but the property value has soared. And while I don't begrudge anybody for watching their property value increase, that's what everyone wants an investment to do. We've lost the starter home here on Staten Island, that starter home mentality that made Staten Island such a rich and bountiful place for the working class and the middle class of New York to come and live. I think it's really important that we get back to that by incentivizing developers not only to build those starter homes again, but to do so in a smart and holistic way that takes the entire needs of a community into consideration and not just their pocketbooks. That means, not overdeveloping and putting strains on our hospital beds, on our school seats, on all of our local services that are already kind of lacking because of our non-engagement with the city. So really, I call it smart development, just taking a neighborhood's needs into consideration before you plan this huge development that's going to put a strain on everything else involved.
That was a great response. I think that's very important to consider, because a lot of what goes on out here. I know entire areas of Staten Island flood when all they need to do is just kind of like revamp the area and direct the floodwaters elsewhere. And we're in a really quiet hurricane season this year, which is great. But in past years, you remember Hurricane Sandy?
Yeah.
I remember being down in Oakwood volunteering, and it was...
I was there.
Yeah.
I was down in Oakwood Beach with... I probably
the same day, yeah.
Right around Cedarview Beach?
Yes.
Cedarview and Cedarview.
Yeah.
I was lucky at Hurricane Sandy. I was living at the top of Guyan Avenue, so I was up on a hill. All we did was lose power. Me and a bunch of my friends ended up going down to Oakwood Beach the day after and 2 days after to help clean up, and it was some of the most important work that we've ever done. We joke that we had never smelled so bad, but we had never been so happy about it. And what really struck me and struck us was these people that we were helping clean out. They had just lost everything, and they were thanking us and trying to give us things for helping them. And we were like, no, you got to stop. But that's just how Staten Islanders are. You know, we're helpers. We look out for each other. And even when we're in a bad space, we're still trying to help each other. So that's part of the beauty of Staten Island. But you're 100% right. The overdevelopment has really impacted our ability to drain off stormwaters. And you can see it. You know, we get the slightest amount of rain. There are places like Port Richmond that flood when we get a quarter of an inch of rain. You know, today's October 10th. I know that I don't know when this is going to go up, but we're forecasted for a nor'easter this weekend. Oh, I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to the low-lying areas on Staten Island as a result of that storm. The flooding is going to be crazy. We need to do something to help mitigate that, and that it is involved in that whole smart development idea of making sure that we're not putting too much of a burden on any one area, spreading it out so that the natural runoff and all of these natural resources that we do have are protected.
That's extremely important because right now, with the climate changing the way that it is, we're going to wind up in a very bad circumstance. So the most that we can do to mitigate those damages will be fantastic. As far as public health, so I myself, I work on behavior analysis. I've been in the public health field for about 10 years. So what can you tell me about what you plan to do for public health? So
I break public health down into two realms. It's physical health and it's mental health. Staten Island is the only borough without a public hospital. We are left out of that conversation at every turn. Part of my platform and one of my goals is to bring a public hospital back to Staten Island. I know that's going to be a pretty heavy job, but it's necessary because our residents shouldn't have to go to other boroughs for care. It's obscene to me that we're asking people who live on the South Shore of Staten Island to have to go into Manhattan to get care that they should be getting here on Staten Island. That puts an extra burden on them. That costs money, costs time that, frankly, we all don't have. You know, life is busy enough and life costs enough to have to worry about driving into the city, congestion pricing, parking, anything like that. So bringing a public hospital to Staten Island is really important to me. I also fully believe in the value of public health, and this ties in with our college system here on Staten Island. CUNY CSI is known throughout the city, throughout the state, throughout the Northeast as a prime nursing college. You know, we are so in demand, but we've had to turn people away because there aren't enough spots to place them after graduation. I've spoken to some CUNY trustees and some CUNY employees, and I've brought up this idea of a working clinic on the CSI campus where nursing students and medical students can get their practical experience, do their practical learning while giving back to the community and helping the community members who maybe can't afford to go to the doctor on a regular basis, go into a public clinic that's CUNY funded, that's giving back for low to no cost to not only receive reactive care, but proactive care, because it's a lot cheaper for an individual to stop diabetes before it starts than have to worry about insulin after, to stop heart disease before you develop it, as opposed to getting on medication afterwards. So proactivity is a way to keep costs down, and the way to do that is to increase not only access, but availability. The same goes with mental health. Today is Mental Health Awareness Day across the nation, and I put out a video today talking about how we need to increase the accessibility and the availability of mental health services here on Staten Island. We're the only borough without a pediatric inpatient psychiatric emergency room. So if a young person is in crisis and they need to go to an emergency room, they have to sit with adults who might be at different stages of their crises. And that's not always a safe place for anybody. So setting one of those up here on Staten Island is really important to me. Just encouraging people to seek mental help when they need it, even if they're not in crisis. I speak to a therapist on a regular basis because just like it's important to keep your physical health in check, keeping your mental health in check is equally as important. You know, mental has an impact on the physical. So making sure that people know that A, there's availability for them to get help if they need it, and B, trying to remove some of the stigma that's still left on that. Even though we've come a long way when it comes to destigmatization of mental health care, you know, Staten Island is still a very Italian, very masculine feeling community where some people might say, hey, I don't need that help, or, it's not important for me to get that help. It's not a bad thing. It's not anything to be ashamed of. It's, you wouldn't talk about someone getting their blood pressure checked on a regular basis. So we shouldn't be talking about people who get their mental health checked on a regular basis too. So all of that combined is going to help us not only in the public health realm, but especially when it comes to the mental health being the driving factor behind crime, behind homelessness, behind addiction. These are, a lot of the issues that we face as a community are rooted in mental health. So anything that I can do as borough president to either bring more services to Staten Island or advocate for the people here to seek out that help when they need it, or even if they're not sure if they need it, that's going to be a really big priority for me.
Okay, that's actually really great to hear, because when it comes to the mental health angle, we have a current administration who is pulling back on mental health support. They're pulling away mental health field medics from mental health field medics from National Guard units and from military units. They're trying to up the masculinity of the entire military and the armed forces in general. And this is going to have an impact on people's mental health. And more importantly for children, children when they're in crisis do face a different set of challenges than adults. And sometimes putting children and adults in rooms when they're in crises is going to be a recipe for something very bad.
Yeah.
So it's very important that both parties receive the care that they need and get that care without needing to break the bank.
Absolutely.
So one of the next things that I wanted to ask you was for transportation. So Staten Island, for anybody who lives out here, knows that if you're not sitting in traffic, then you're probably home. So what's your focus on transportation?
So transportation, we're going to approach it a few different ways. Number one, and I think that any conversation about transportation has to start with the MTA. We need a full public forensic audit of the MTA. They go through billions of dollars a year, and I don't know where it goes. You don't know where it goes. Nobody on Staten Island knows where it goes. It sure as hell isn't coming to the service that we get. We pay the same fares as everybody else. We pay the same taxes as everyone else. And we have the least amount of service to show for it. And that's unacceptable to me. So a full public forensic audit of the MTA to find out where the money's going, why it's not coming back to us in the form of service. Next, we need to increase the reliability and of the public transportation here on Staten Island. I'm lucky. I live at an intersection that has a bus stop, but I still have to drive my wife to the ferry every morning because the bus doesn't come reliably enough. I have friends who are teachers who last year they had to fail some students because they weren't getting to school on time, and chronic lateness was making them have to fail them. Not their academics and not anything within their control. They were getting up at the exact same time. They were going through their normal routines, and sleep being so important to developing minds. You can't ask these kids to get up earlier and start leaving earlier just because a bus isn't reliable enough to get them there on time. That's, robbing from Peter to pay Paul. So making sure that our buses are running on time as they're supposed to be, that's going to go a big way in easing that congestion that we see every day on Staten Island. I also want to increase the availability of the NYC ferries, the fast ferries. Right now, we only have the one route between the West Side and St. George. I know that Councilmember Camilla Hanks and Councilmember Justin Brannan from Bay Ridge have recently introduced a bill to expand that service from St. George to Bay Ridge. Love that idea. It's been years of talking about it. I'm so thrilled to finally see it coming to fruition. But let's keep going. Let's bring that fast ferry down to the East Shore and to the South Shore. We've got Gateway Park, which after Hurricane Sandy did have a fast ferry because the train wasn't running. There's parking there. All we need to do is arrange for transportation from the parking lot to the pier. The infrastructure's still there. I want to do that. That's going to be priority number one for me once we get into office. It's starting those conversations to expand to the East Shore and then eventually to the South Shore, because people, like I said, people in Tottenville, I've spoken to some people on this trail that they're spending 6.5, 7 hours a day on express buses. A, that's not express. B, that's time spent away from their families, spent away from their friends, time spent spending money not on Staten Island. And if we're looking at it from purely an economical standpoint, I want that money being spent here. I want the local small businesses on Staten Island to be reaping those rewards, not the big chains in Manhattan, because I have to get food before I sit on an express bus to go home, because who knows when I'm going to get home. I want all that to stay on Staten Island, and by making faster commutes, that's going to help improve our economy here on Staten Island.
I think that's a great idea because it will especially ease traffic, having people be able to actually access the city in Brooklyn directly. Because we have that, the ferry already, but actually getting that ferry to Brooklyn would ease the Verrazano traffic so much that it might save people hours in their commute.
Yeah.
And that will get people to work sooner because road rage is a real problem out here.
It really is. And, even beyond that, they've got the Brooklyn Queens connection, the light rail that's going to start being built in the next few years. If we can connect Staten Island to that route via this fast ferry to Bay Ridge, that's going to open up all of the outer boroughs as well. So people aren't going to have to go through Manhattan to get to Brooklyn or go through Manhattan to get to Queens. They don't have to sit on the ferry and then take a train up to 42nd Street to catch the 7 train into Queens when they can just take the Brooklyn-Queens connection. So it's making sure that we have access to everything that the other boroughs have access to, even if they're not being built here. Making sure that we can at least connect to them in a way that makes sense for us and not in a way that's going to really hamper people too much. And these ferries are one of the easiest ways that we can do that.
That's a fantastic idea. I'm looking forward to seeing that happen. So do you have anything else that you would like to tell the audience?
At least when it comes to public transportation, I saw recently Councilwoman Camila Hanks wrote an op-ed about the Fair Fares program. I'm a firm believer in that. I think Staten Island is done a disservice with our public transportation options into the congestion zone, into the city where so many of us work. That the price of an express bus on Staten Island should be tied to a base fare. We don't have all the options that the other boroughs have, where you have multiple ways to get into the city without having to pay an express fare. So tying the price of an express bus to a base fare for the SIM buses makes sense on an equity level, and it makes sense on an economic level. It's going to encourage more usage of the express bus system to get into the city instead of people having to rely on their cars. The city and the state are doing everything they can to discourage the use of cars in New York City. Until they give Staten Island the public transportation service that we deserve and that's equitable to the rest of the boroughs, you can't expect that of us. I would love to see less cars on the road, but you need to give people the option, an option that works to make them leave those cars home. And that's what I plan on doing.
That's fantastic. It would be great to see a lot less traffic on Staten Island. Excuse me. As far as me, do you have any questions for me while we are here tonight?
What in all that you've been talking about and all that you've been doing here on this podcast and in your just time here on Staten Island, what are the issues that are important to you? Because that's how I learn. I learned this acronym a few years ago. It's called WAIT, W-A-I-T. It's why am I talking? If I don't have anything to add to a conversation, the best way I know to participate is to listen. And that's what I've been doing, going around Staten Island for the past year and beyond that. But I've been campaigning hard for a year now. And what I've been doing is going to different groups, going to different neighborhoods, whether it's civic groups, whether it's churches, whether it's community boards, and listening. Because those are the conversation. Those conversations are what should be driving our elected officials to make change. And I don't have all the answers because I don't know all the questions. So I like to talk to people and say, what are the pressing issues for you? And how can we work together to solve those? Because in the end, that's what government's supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be solving problems for the everyday citizen because that's who we serve. That's who we are elected to take care of. So, for you and your listeners, what are some issues that you've seen on Staten Island that haven't been addressed and you feel need to be?
So number one, there's a lot of schools around Staten Island that are in very strange spots. So I was a substitute teacher for a while. I currently work as a behavior analyst in training. A lot of these schools have these weird parking lots. Like there's a brand new one that just opened up on Richmond Avenue.
Yeah.
It's that intersection at Richmond and Travis is one of the most dangerous intersections on Staten Island. and they built the school where the school buses have to come out of that intersection every day. So given your focus on transportation, what would be something that you might be doing in response to those kinds of areas?
So for those really heavy traffic spots, we need to increase our. I hate to say police presence, but the crossing guards, the safety professionals, to make sure that we are running the traffic in a way that makes sense, not just for the school, but for the people that do drive past it. We are, while not as urban as the other boroughs, we are still an urban area. And, schools aren't in these far off fields. They're not isolated. They're they're right there in neighborhoods. So we need to make sure that we're working with the neighborhoods and with the schools to make sure that everybody wins here. It's never going to be perfect, but we can make it better than it is. You brought up that school at Travis and Richmond. There are schools on Forest Avenue by Forest and Decker that traffic is a nightmare every day, in the morning for drop off and in the afternoon for pickup. We have to do better, not just for our drivers and for the parents, but for the students, because it's really all about safety. Safety is our number one priority, and making sure that our students are safe, their parents are safe, and the drivers that are just coming and going past them are safe. That's the number one goal, making sure that everyone can achieve whatever their goal is that day in as safe a way as possible. And then, we wake up the next morning and we do it all over again. So, my background is in insurance. I'm an insurance advocate. I fight with insurance companies for a living, and I observe risk for a living. And, risk reduction, risk management is always going to be something that drives me. And you look at situations like that, and it's not about how we can make this perfect. It's just how we can make the risk less for everyone involved. And that's how I'm going to approach that task.
That's very important, because right now you cannot trust everybody that's on the road.
You can't. And
yeah.
In a perfect world, I would tell everyone, hey, give yourself 5 more minutes so you don't have to speed through that red light, or you don't have to cut somebody off, or you don't have to, drive so angrily. I hope they listen. I try to give myself enough time to get places, and that's really helped me, not get into instances like that. But, I have eyes. I see what's going on around me. And, again, I'm not perfect. There have been times that I've been sitting in traffic and I can feel myself getting hot. I can feel myself getting angry, saying, oh, why won't these people turn? This is coming this way. This guy's coming that way. At the end of the day, it's 5-10 minutes. We all just need to take a breath and realize that it's still going to be there when whatever we're going to is still going to be there when we get there. So, that's the mindset that I try to take.
Agreed. And you just tackled most of my big issues for Staten Island was traffic safety, and then taking care of the environment and trying to figure out how to redirect like floodwaters and things when we get them, because I remember even my own apartment used to flood like crazy.
Yeah.
Like the water out here gets really bad.
Yeah.
And then is there anything that you want to add kind of like on a national level that you would like to talk about?
Not so much on the national level, because really I've tried really hard to stay focused on Staten Island. I think that Staten Island Borough President shouldn't be concerned with the national issues. We should be concerned with Staten Island's needs, Staten Island's wants, and the issues facing Staten Islanders. But one of the, I guess you can call it a national issue that we're facing here on Staten Island is the NESE Williams pipeline that they want to place off of our shores to take liquefied natural gas to other parts of the Northeast. From the minute that this was announced, I've been against it. I've participated in protests. I've participated in marches. I've joined press conferences. I've held my own press conference. Our waters were once the jewel of New York City. The rich from Manhattan and Brooklyn used to come spend their summers on South Beach, in those bungalows on Midland Avenue. I remember growing up, my parents used to fish at a Gateway Park, and my brothers and I would swim in the waters there. You couldn't do that for so long because of the pollution in the water. We're finally getting to a point where we can do that again, whether we want to or not. A few weeks ago, it was Raritan Bay Day down at the conference house, and Staten Island Kayak had a free demo. You can go out in one of their kayaks for free. So my son and I went out and we ended up capsizing off in the waters off of the conference house. The water is clean. It was crisp. I still only have 10 fingers and 10 toes, 2 eyes. And I want to keep it that way. I want to make sure that we're keeping our waters safe and our shores safe so that families can enjoy them. Our beaches should be treated as the treasures that they are and not just left to ruin like what they were in the bad old days. So, that's a national issue that is impacting us here on Staten Island right now that, one of the focuses of my tenure in Borough Hall is going to be whether it's, no matter who I have to go to, whether it's the governor's office or if I have to go to Washington to do it, I'm going to find a way to stop this because it does not work for Staten Islanders. It doesn't work for our waters, it doesn't work for our wallets, and it just doesn't work for us. And I think that, we've part of that forgotten borough ethos that we kind of adopted as a protection ploy has been this sort of acceptance that we're going to be ignored until it comes time to pay for something. Who cares about Staten Island until we need to build something and then boom, we're going to use all their tax money. Or who cares about Staten Island? They don't participate, so we're just going to go down there and do whatever we want to them because they're going to throw a fit anyway. Part of why I'm running and why I think it's so important that we re-engage with the city is because of issues like that, where Staten Islanders are just ignored until it comes time to pay for something. I want to reclaim our seat at the table so that when the future of Staten Island is spoken about, Staten Islanders are there. Because if you are not sitting at the table, chances are you're on the menu. I want Staten Islanders in control of the future of Staten Island. I think that we have abdicated that power of ours for too long, and it's been to our detriment. We've seen so much investment in the other boroughs that we haven't seen here. And that's not to say that I want Staten Island is never going to look like Brooklyn. We're never going to look like Queens. We're never going to look like the Bronx. We're never going to look like Manhattan. We're always going to be Staten Island. But that doesn't mean that we can't get that same level of investment, if not the same type of investment. And that's what I want to re-engage with the city to make happen, because we have needs on Staten Island. We have a lot of needs, and we're not going to be able to solve them by ourselves. We're an equal borough in this city, and we need to reassert that stance and that status and make sure that the city knows that if they're going to think about doing something here on Staten Island, they're going to have to deal with Staten Islanders. They're not just going to watch us throw tantrums and then roll over because it's what we always do. Re-engaging doesn't mean that you're a rubber stamp. It also doesn't mean that I'm looking to be controlled opposition. It means that I'm going to make sure that Staten Islanders are put first in my negotiations with the rest of the city and with the rest of the state. And that should be the borough president's job. That's, advocating for Staten Island, saying, hey, this doesn't work for us. But beyond that, it's not just saying no and having at it. It's, advocacy doesn't end at no, it starts at no. So if something doesn't work for us, let's find something that does. Let's find that common ground where, they say the best negotiations are when all the parties walk away pissed off. Mm-hmm. Let's piss people off. Let's, if we're going to be pissed off no matter what, we're going to be upset no matter what happens. I at least will take solace in knowing that we're going to piss off a lot of people in the other boroughs too, because we're going to make sure that whatever they're trying to push on us makes sense for us in a way. And I think that's the job of every borough president. That should be the job of every council member. It's finding a way to make a greater idea, a bigger idea work for your constituency. And if it doesn't, negotiating and working to find that common ground. We've lost that a little bit, I think, on both sides. There's been too much to gain by the tribalism that we're seeing. Democrats refuse to work with Republicans. Republicans refuse to work with Democrats. We're all Staten Islanders. We're all New Yorkers. I want all of us to succeed, because that means that a rising tide lifts all the boats. So let's all work together to raise those tides so that all these boats can come up. Because even though Staten Island is an island, we're not an island unto ourselves. We're one of 5 boroughs, and we deserve to be seen as such. We don't deserve to be forgotten anymore. We are unforgettable.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think it's really important that you brought it back to local because right now, with everything that's going on, it's really tempted to kind of have this animosity towards the other side. But really, we are all New Yorkers, and that's what's most important because we've been through things like September 11th and Hurricane Sandy and the COVID lockdowns that other states couldn't fathom.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, Mike Colombo. Get out and vote. Make sure that you get out and vote because that is extremely important to get out and vote. So my name is David Harrison Greis. This has been the Greis Report. Do you have any closing remarks?
Mike Colombo. Early voting starts on October 25th. Election day is November 4th. Visit our website, www.colombo4si.nyc, to learn a little bit more about me and find out how you can get more involved with the campaign.
All right. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Have a great night out there.
Thank you.